All right, so today, first off, I got my ass beat at work today. I'm telling you, some days as a software engineer, you just hit brick walls, and that's just how it is. Right now I'm working with AWS Lambdas and a Laravel application that is considered serverless in the cloud. It's really frustrating. A lot of it's because it's not something you can test very easily locally. You have to push it up a lot of times to test things. And I'm sure there are ways to test it locally better than the current configuration that myself and my team have set up. But man, I can't seem to find a way to test these dang things out locally. Some days you just hit brick walls, and that's what I want to talk about today. I'm telling you, today just didn't suck, but it sucked. It really sucked. It was just frustrating. I enjoyed the day. I still had some pretty solid conversations, and it was a decent day, and the work side of it just became extremely frustrating. And that's part of being a software engineer. It's hitting brick walls. And a lot of days when I hit brick walls, I try to look back on the day and it's like, okay, what did I learn today? What did I learn while hitting those brick walls? Because a lot of times you get so frustrated in the moment while you're working on that project, that application, or whatever it is, and you're trying to hit, and you're trying to just get it to freaking work, and it just won't. And you ask your teammates for help, and they have no clue either. Some teammates are a lot cooler about that than others. Others just get frustrated with you, and that's, to each their own. And especially as a new developer, when you're coming in, it can be really hard to ask for help. And I highly recommend that you just get over it. You just get over it. You admit when you don't know, and you go to your team members and you ask for help. Today I had to ask for a lot of help, and it started off with local virtualization problems, right? I was just trying to get my dang container set up, and it turns out two of the other developers on my team had the same exact problem I had, and it was a weird one. It was the virtual machine didn't have permissions to access the vendor directory for Composer. It's like, what? Like, why does the virtual machine not have access to do that? We never found out why. We found out the solution, and it was we just had to go and change the ownership to the local user for the vendor directory, and then within the virtual machine, somehow that gave it permissions for the user on the local machine. And it's just like, what? Why the hell does that fix it? And what did we do in the first place to do that? I'm sure we did something because we all had a similar error, but we have no idea how it happened. It was the most frustrating first 3 hours of a work day I've had in a long time. Like, it was, and it was all three of us. And then after that, I moved on to the Lambdas, which I already told you was just like more brick walls. We never figured out the first problem. We got it fixed, luckily, but we never figured out why it happened. So, hopefully it doesn't happen again. We'll see. But that's just part of it. So we were able to get around that one. And then I moved on to the Mercator Lambdas, which was actually a different repository than I was having to do the virtual machine corrections or fix on. That was that weird bug. And the Mercator Lambdas, the Lambdas, AWS Lambdas. So they're like functions, and any AWS service can trigger that function, and that function has an event from the given service that triggered it and context to the Amazon virtual server and the context of the Lambda itself. They're really weird to work on because they're they're supposed to be very, very singly oriented. They're supposed to follow the single responsibility principle to a T, basically. They're not supposed to care about who triggers them or what they are triggering or communicating, whatever information the triggered service gives to the Lambda. And so the Lambda hands that off to the other service, and it's just, it's weird because they're so, they follow really good architectural principles, but they're weird because they're on the server, on a virtual cloud, private cloud. On a virtual private cloud, they are serverless, which basically means that you have to be careful what you call, because serverless can have multiple instances going at a time where there's a load balancer in front of them, which just basically splits traffic across multiple instances of your application. So you can't, for example, trigger a seeder by having the Lambda send an AJAX request to the Laravel application, which triggers an artisan command, which seeds the database. You can't do that because it might accidentally trigger it 6 times. It's very, very funky and unorthodox compared to what I am normally very competent working in, right? And it's stupid frustrating. On top of that, the Lambdas are very hard to test. So obviously they're in the cloud, so there's no interface. There's no browser, so you can't just open it up and open up your Chrome console and start, testing it. And so, of course, set up some TDD within the repository, within the Lambdas repo, and TDD stands for test-driven development. But TDD, test-driven development, is really, really hard to test because although the Lambdas are architecturally pretty single responsibility oriented and don't depend on much, they do depend on the fact that they are in the AWS environment. So a lot of these things, AWS has a secrets manager service. So if you have any secrets or client IDs and secrets and you need to access a third-party API Salesforce or Salesforce, Mongodb, anything like that, then you actually have to call the AWS, the Amazon Web Service, the specific service on Amazon called the Secrets Manager, to get the information, and then you have to connect to the third-party API, whether it be Salesforce or MongoDB or whatever you need to connect to, using the information you got from Amazon's internal service, the Secrets Manager service. And so right there, you're having to deal with multiple async calls, and you have to wait for those calls before you can make the next call. And then all of that stuff is really, really hard to test. There's ways to do it, to test asynchronous calls. It's not fun. If you can avoid it, I definitely recommend it. But the hardest part is that, normally I don't test async calls. I'll test a lot of things in PHP. I've referenced why I don't really enjoy test-driven development. There's a lot of cons and there's a lot of pros to it. But when there's no interface, I'm going to use test-driven development. I'm going to set up something so I can test locally before I have to deploy. And so that's what we did, is within this Lambdas directory or repository, we have these really, pretty concise but to the point tests set up. The problem is we need to test these asynchronous calls, and a lot of these asynchronous calls, a lot of these API connections we make depend on the fact that the Lambda is actually in the AWS environment, because within the AWS environment, the Lambda has the context to access the Secret Manager service in AWS. Locally, that context doesn't exist yet. It has to be in a actual environment. So even test-driven development's hard. So you don't have an interface to just mess with it in real time using the console. Test-driven development, you can test some things, but not too many really. And again, I'm sure there's ways around that I just haven't figured out yet. By the way, if anybody does know or has experience with Lambdas and testing Lambdas, please leave a comment below. I would love to hear what you guys have. So that was just a nightmare all day with Lambdas. And I have to communicate with the tech ops team, and I have to communicate with other developers saying, hey, I have to push this up. I'm not sure if it's going to work or break something. We have a dev, we have a stage, we have a production environment. Because our client's really big, we've got the whole workflow, but still you want to make sure that somebody else isn't using that environment for testing something else you're going to break, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then tech ops, whenever you ask a favor from them, tech ops is always in demand. They're helping everybody else out, so you got to get in line. So while I'm working on this all day and just trying to figure stuff out, mainly through trial and error, again, I know there's got to be a better way out there I haven't figured out yet, but that's how I was doing it today. I decided to start working on a roles and permissions setup for our second Laravel application for this project. So we have two Laravel applications. One is the API itself, the other is the admin that interacts with the API. They both use MongoDB, which is not a default database option within Laravel. There's a package for it called Yesengers. It's a great package, by the way. Great package. The one hard thing about it, though, is testing is a little bit annoying when using MongoDB. So the thing with MongoDB is Mongo doesn't care. It does not care. You can set up migrations and stuff, but you don't have to. And when you do set up migrations, it's still weird to enforce things. So even if you have a migration with these given columns, they're actually documents and collections, then you can say, okay, hey, you can enforce these types, but you can still go in and add as many extra properties as you want. Think of MongoDB as more of an array of JavaScript objects or JSON type of layout in comparison to a traditional relational database, which is MySQL. And so I started doing the roles and permissions on our admin side, which is something I'm very, very familiar with. I've done it, 10 or 15 times in Laravel. I know how to do roles and permissions. And the first thing I always do with roles and permissions is I set up tests. I love tests when it comes to roles and permissions. And then once I get the test set up, then I'll set up the users the user, if there is no user, the roles, and then the permissions. And then I'll use Laravel gates and Laravel permissions, et cetera, et cetera. And then you make the relationships between them, and then you hook into Laravel to do some other cool stuff and add whatever middleware you need, etc. I couldn't get past the freaking tests. Wall 1, brick wall 1, virtual machine was just driving us nuts in the morning. Wall 2, the Mercator Lambdas, extraordinarily hard to test. Wall 3, I couldn't even set up the freaking test-driven development because we were using MongoDB, and it doesn't work the same as MySQL on a fundamental level. And so whenever I was trying to create tests that depend on, for example, confirming that we can't have duplicate roles. Well, to do that, you obviously need to refresh your test database or truncate your test database or drop your test database, create one role, and then create a second role. And the second role, you should assert or expect an exception that says you can't duplicate that role. Simple. It is simple. Except MongoDB just doesn't care. So I had to move to a Laravel observer and say, okay, hey, if this is a duplicate, then don't allow it, etc., etc. Fine. I'll just hook into the model observer when a role is being created. If a role with this given unique identifier that I don't want replicated on the roles collection, aka table in MySQL, then throw an exception, and we'll expect that exception. Worked perfectly. Functionally worked perfectly. Within the tests, though, I had multiple tests where we were creating the same role, like user can be assigned admin role. That was a test. Roles cannot be duplicated. Well, that would create an admin role, and then it would try to create a second admin role. The problem was the Mongo database, or specifically a collection in Mongo, equivalent to a table in MySQL, would not refresh or reset before each test. So if I made a test that said user can be assigned admin role, and then I made another test that said admin role cannot be added twice into the database, wasn't that specific, by the way, but just as an example, then the second test would fail because the first test had already created the admin role, and then it just wouldn't work because there was already the admin role. I couldn't even check if there were duplicates because the first one was a duplicate. So when I asserted that there was only one before asserting that there is still one after I tried to create a second one, assertion failed, test fails, and whatever. So I spent the last 3 to 4 hours of my day switching between the lambdas, waiting for them to build so I could test them in the live environment, and messing with Mongodb, trying to get it set up and for testing within Laravel and PHP unit specifically. Got none of it working. That's a day of brick walls. Sometimes that is the life of a developer. I'm on my way home right now. I am just, by the end of the day, I was ready to punch my computer. I wish it was an inanimate object. Like, I wish it had emotions and I could hurt its feelings right now because I'm so pissed at my computer. It is unbelievable. But sometimes that's just how it is. You walk away, you go do something else like jiu-jitsu or kickboxing. Get some of that anger out, get some of that frustration out, eat some food, get a good night's rest, and then you go back in and absolutely lie to yourself about the day you had yesterday. That's how you do it. You don't say, oh my God, I don't want to go in tomorrow. Oh my God, I feel so sorry. No, you don't do that. That's not how you get through brick walls. You say, hey, I got knocked down, I'm going to get back up. I got knocked down, I'm going to get back up. I got knocked down, I'm going to get back up. So much of being an engineer is having days like this and just realizing, hey, it was a freaking tough day. Tomorrow will be better. Maybe it won't. Maybe you'll have 2 tough days in a row. Maybe you'll have 2 tough weeks in a row or 2 tough months in a row. Who knows? But if you keep going at it, if you keep slamming your head into that brick wall as hard as you can slam your head in that brick wall every single day, no matter how frustrated or pissed you get, and then you just realize, okay, I need to walk away today. Today was frustrating. Today was hard. I got my ass kicked. It felt like I ran into a brick wall that punched back. It felt like I stepped into a ring with Mike Tyson, and dude can still throw a nasty right hook. Some days that is how it is. Guys, do not let these days discourage you from being a software engineer. My favorite quote in the world is a quote by Aristotle. Excellence is an art won through training and habituation. We do not act rightly because we have excellence nor virtue, but rather we have those because we have acted rightly. We are what we repeatedly do. Excellence, then, is not an act, but a habit. Just keep trying. Don't give up. Don't start pitying yourself. Don't feel sorry for yourself because nobody cares. You'll have people on your team like, hey, whatever. But as long as you actually just keep working at the problem, and as long as you actually do the things that you are competent enough to do in a timely manner, when you face these walls, when you face these brick walls, nobody's going to get on you. They know you're trying. They know you're working hard. And ask them. Put them on the spot. Like, hey, do you know what to do. I could really use help on this. And I guarantee you guys, 99% of the time, the other engineers on your team, they'll be more than happy to help. They'll be more than happy to help, you know. And once they come over, if they can't figure it out either, then you've just justified the amount of time you're putting on it, because nobody knows what to do. So yeah, it's going to take some time. And if the time doesn't justify the outcome of what you're trying to achieve, then it sounds like they should remove it, your team should remove it from the project goals, or find a workaround or a different thing. But until then, you have to make the decision that, hey, I am going to work on this until I no longer fail. I am going to keep getting up, and no matter how many times I get knocked down, I will get back up and try again, and try again, and try again. And eventually, that brick wall that's punching back right now, eventually you'll be able to run through that brick wall. And mentally, you'll be better for it. Not just the skill set you garner, not just the fact that you got the ticket or issue or thing that needed to get done completed for your team. As a person, interpersonally, you know, your tenacity will be greater, your pertinacity will be greater, your persistence, you know, what you know you are willing to take will be more than you previously thought. That is the importance of running through brick walls as an engineer, and it makes you a better you. So guys, that's what I got. This is, you know, just my personal take after having a very, very, very frustrating, difficult, hard, feeling like I got punched in the gourads kind of day. And I'm gonna get back up tomorrow. I'm gonna try again. And if it doesn't work tomorrow, I'll try again. And I will keep trying till, you know, somebody tells me not to, or it works. And hopefully it works. You know, I want it to work. I want to keep working on this until I understand the problem. That way, if I ever face it again, I won't go in with this mindset of, oh, crap, I remember last time I did that. I don't want to do this now. I don't ever want to have that feeling. I want to say, yeah, I remember last time I did that. Man, the first time it took me 2 months to figure out, but now I can do that in 2 hours. That's the power of being a software engineer. That's the power of working your ass off and just going through brick walls. So guys, this is Zachary Horn with Clean Code Studio. Clean code, clean life, simplify. And let's knock down some brick walls, guys. It's what we do.